Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm Jason Godbey. I'm a filmmaker and content creator based in New York City, and today we're taking a look back at the Canon C300 Mark II. As many of you know, the camera market has exploded in recent years, and as creators, we always feel like we have to have the latest and greatest gear. But many of these new cameras are cost prohibitive, and that's why we're looking at these older cinema cameras, to see if they're still relevant now, and to see if you could still use them for your projects. To give you some context, Canon first launched their cinema line with the C300 Mark I back in 2011. In the years following, they released the C100, the C500, and they've been updating the line ever since. In 2020, they released the C300 Mark III and the C70. Over the years, the cinema line has been used on countless features, documentaries, commercials, and television shows. The Canon C300 Mark II was released in 2015 and was the next step in the evolutionary ladder from its predecessor. It has a super 35mm CMOS sensor and uses an EF lens mount, so Canon EF and EFS lenses will work with it. It's not full frame, but make no mistake, it is a full-fledged, fully loaded 4K cinema camera. But let's break it down. This camera is a monster. It's big and chunky. The model I used to review this was a total road warrior. It was even outfitted with Velcro so that you could stick things like wireless receivers to it. It's battle ready and tough. There's real weight to it, which you can feel when you're going handheld. The construction feels very solid, and the weight definitely helps to stabilize the camera, especially since it has no in-body stabilization. The body has all of these buttons right on the side to access things like shutter speed and ISO and other functions without having to dive into the menu. The buttons light up, which is a huge plus for me. I spend half my life shooting in dark places with a black camera that has black buttons that are usually impossible to see. I don't know why more cameras don't have this feature, but it makes shooting so much easier. The camera has a top handle component with the screen, the menu controls, and 2 XLR inputs for sound. The model I borrowed from JMR had this handle which attached with 2 screws that were fastened by an Allen wrench. I also used my own top handle, and there's also a little side handle grip with a joystick and a wheel that allow you to adjust things like your focus box and aperture. Another key feature for me was the multiple record buttons. There's one on the control pad and one on the side handle, and there's also one on the side of the camera near the lens. This makes operating so much easier. No matter how you hold this camera, you can easily hit record. One possible drawback of the camera is that it's modular. You need to assemble it each and every time you use it. It's more than just, put a battery and a card in it and slap a lens on the front. You can't just throw this thing into a backpack. It's a big camera, it needs a big case with a big tripod, and you have to drag it around. The size of the camera is both an advantage and a disadvantage. It has the same wow factor as other cameras in the Canon cinema line. If you use this on a client shoot, your client is going to be impressed. They will see that you showed up with a real serious camera. The downside of that is, if you live in a city like I do, you're going to attract attention. Nearly every time I pulled this thing out and set it on sticks, someone came over and talked to me. In many places, you will definitely need a permit if you decide to shoot with this beast. The screen on the Mark II is a decent size, but I still did have some trouble seeing it, especially when shooting in bright sunlight. If you're running and gunning, the screen is adequate, but you may want to use an external monitor if you're working on bigger jobs. The menu system is very user-friendly, especially when you compare it to something like a Sony menu. It's pretty intuitive. Like all Canon menus, there's a favorites tab that will help you access the settings you use the most. This camera shoots in 4K up to 30 frames a second, UHD, and 2K. It also shoots in Full HD up to 60 frames a second. You can shoot in 10-bit color as well as a variety of picture profiles. I use C-Log and C-Log 2 in either the Cinema Gamut or BT709. Canon has some great tutorials on YouTube if you need a breakdown of the different picture profiles and what they can do. One advantage of shooting in higher resolution, if your final output is going to be in 1080, you can edit the 4K or UHD footage in a 1080p timeline, which will allow you to crop in and reframe in post. Like all great cinema cameras, the C300 Mark II gives you the option to shoot in shutter speed or shutter angle. I love the option of shooting in shutter angle because I can just set it to 180 degrees, and no matter which frame rate I choose, my shutter speed will be right. The camera has Canon's dual pixel autofocus system complete with face tracking. The face tracking works very well, but only with certain lenses. For instance, face tracking wouldn't work with my older 24-105 f4 lens, but it worked perfectly well with my 55-250mm EFS lens. One of the best features of the Canon Cinema line is the built-in ND system. You can add up to 6 stops of ND, and the buttons are easily accessible, which makes it really easy to adjust exposure on the fly. The native ISO on this camera is 800, so shooting with ND filters is essential. I was shooting outside in bright sunlight, and my exposure was changing constantly. The built-in ND filters made it so much easier to nail the exposure without having to adjust my ISO. Warning, once you use a camera with built-in ND filters, you won't want to go back. The C300 Mark II is equipped with 2 XLR inputs as well as an internal microphone. Here's a sound sample.
So usually I get a team of people, whether it is a cinematographer or a sound person. I try my best to create my own content. I didn't start out like that, but I started to realize that that was more important than trying to get roles.
So who's it for? Like the Sony FX9, this camera is for professionals. It's been a favorite of documentary filmmakers for years, and there's a long list of award-winning films shot on the C300, including the Oscar winners for Best Documentary Feature, Free Solo, and 25 Feet from Stardom. One of my favorite documentary series, Sonic Highways, also used the camera. So could you use this to shoot a narrative feature? Of course. This camera with some great cinema glass, fully rigged out, would definitely work. In comparison to the C300 Mark III, of course that camera has some amazing updated features, the biggest of which probably being the ability to shoot in 4K at 60 and 120 frames per second, which is amazing if you need it. But the Mark III retails for $8,000. And I've seen the Mark II used for less than $3,000. One thing I can say about this camera is once you get the hang of it, you can really have a lot of fun with it. That basketball movie that you saw at the top of the show was shot completely handheld, and I had a blast shooting it. Running around with this camera on the basketball court, getting these different angles, there's a real energy that you get from going handheld with a camera like this, which is why I think so many documentarians love it. In conclusion, the C300 Mark II is still a monster camera and incredibly versatile. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe for more content.
This is the BTRP Media Network.